Hello, everyone. I am the sleep storyteller, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before we begin, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps out a lot. Also, let me know in the comments, where are you from and what time are you listening? Now get comfortable and relax beneath the endless expanse of the ocean, where sunlight fades into the deep. A city of unimaginable beauty once thrived. Towers of white stone and gold, bridges that arched over sapphire waters, and streets that shimmered beneath the glow of crystal lanterns. This was Atlantis, the heart of an empire that had no rival. For centuries, its people lived in harmony, their knowledge surpassing that of any known civilization. They tamed the seas, harnessed the power of the earth, and unlocked secrets of the cosmos. But power, like the tide, is ever-changing, and what was once a beacon of wisdom became a place of hubris. On the eve of the great storm that would consume them all, the High Oracle stood at the summit of the Temple of Poseidon, her silver eyes reflecting the coming darkness. "The gods whisper of ruin," she murmured. The council, adorned in robes of sapphire and emerald, dismissed her words as superstition. King Orithian, ruler of Atlantis, stood before them, his golden crown casting a halo of light. "The gods do not govern Atlantis. We are the masters of our own fate. But in the depths of the sea, forces beyond mortal understanding had already begun to stir. Young Callista, daughter of the Oracle, felt the unease in the wind. Unlike her mother, she had never seen visions, but she sensed the shifting of fate. As she wandered the outer districts of the city, she encountered Kale, a foreigner whose ship had wrecked upon their shores. Unlike the Atlanteans, whose eyes gleamed with celestial energy, Kale's gaze was dark, filled with secrets of lands beyond the known world. "Atlantis is not as eternal as you believe," he said, his voice low. "There are stories, warnings of cities that rose too high and fell beneath the waves. The people of Atlantis did not listen to warnings. They had conquered the elements, bent the will of nature, and believed themselves untouchable. But beneath the marble streets, in the sacred catacombs where ancient texts lay hidden, the old prophecies spoke of a reckoning. Callista found herself drawn to these forbidden places, seeking answers to the unease that gripped her soul. She unrolled a scroll that had been untouched for centuries, its ink still dark against the parchment. When the three omens align, the red moon, the weeping earth, and the silent tide, Atlantis shall fall. The first omen arrived with the red moon, rising over the city like an unblinking eye. The people marveled at its beauty, unaware of what it heralded. The second came days later, earthquakes shaking the grand halls, cracking the statues of the gods. The third was the most ominous. The sea, once teeming with life, grew eerily still. The tides no longer danced against the shores. The waves held their breath. Panic spread through the city, but But King Orithian refused to yield. Atlantis will not fall to superstition, he declared. But in the darkness, the priests whispered of an ancient betrayal of a power sealed beneath the ocean long ago. It was a force not meant to be disturbed, and yet, in their arrogance, the Atlanteans had drawn too close. Callista and Kale, bound by fate, sought answers in the oldest ruins of the city. What they found chilled them to the bone. Deep within the archives, a forgotten tablet spoke of the heart of Atlantis, a source of immense power, kept dormant beneath the great temple. It was a gift from the gods, but it was never meant to be wielded without consequence. The heart beats faster, Kale murmured, touching the stone. It knows what is coming. As the final night approached, storm clouds gathered over the city, black as ink. The sea, once motionless, roared to life. Lightning cracked across the heavens, illuminating the towering spires of Atlantis one last time. The ground trembled with a force beyond nature, and from the depths of the ocean, a sound unlike any other echoed, a lament, a cry of something ancient waking from its slumber. Callista ran to the temple, her heart pounding. "We have to stop this," she cried, but it was too late. The heart of Atlantis pulsed, sending shockwaves through the city. Towers crumbled, streets split open, and the ocean itself rose in fury. King Orithian stood upon his throne as the waters surged through the great halls. "We were gods," he whispered, even as the sea claimed him. Kale pulled Callista through the chaos, towards the cliffs, overlooking the city. "We have to leave." But Callista hesitated, looking back at the place that had been her home, now sinking beneath the waves. The screams of her people echoed in the storm, swallowed one by the unforgiving sea. In the final moments, as Atlantis disappeared into the abyss, Callista and Kale leaped into the unknown, carried away by the tide. The city was gone, but its secrets were not lost. They lived on in the whispers of the ocean, in the ruins buried beneath the waves, and in the hearts of those who would one day seek the truth. Atlantis had fallen, but its legend would never die. The sea carried them away, its cold embrace tightening around their bodies as they were tossed by the wrathful waves. Callista fought against the water, her lungs burning, her arms weak. She felt Kale's grip on her wrist, anchoring her to reality, even as the current threatened to pull them apart. Darkness swallowed them whole, the echoes of Atlantis's final cries fading into the abyss. Then silence. Callista awoke to the taste of salt on her lips, the warmth of the sun against her skin. The world was no longer a city of towering spires and golden halls. It was sand, stretching endlessly beneath a sky painted in hues of morning fire. She coughed, water spilling from her lungs, and rolled onto her side. Kale lay beside her, unmoving. For a terrifying moment, she thought the sea had stolen him as well. shuddering breath, he stirred. "We made it," he rasped, his voice raw. Callista sat up, staring at the endless horizon. The ocean, once a friend, now felt like an enemy, a thief that had stolen her home, her people, her very identity. She turned back, half expecting to see the ruins of Atlantis in the distance, but there was nothing. No trace of the city that had stood for centuries. Just water, stretching forever. Cale pushed himself up on his elbows, his dark eyes scanning their surroundings. "Where are we?" Callista shook her head. The island was unfamiliar, its jagged cliffs rising sharply from the shore. The trees were twisted and ancient, their roots clawing into the rocky soil. Somewhere in the distance, a bird cried out, a sound so foreign it made her shiver. They were alone. Cale rose unsteadily to his feet, offering her a hand. She took it without hesitation, gripping it tightly as if he were the last tether to the world she had known. "We can't stay here," he said. "There has to be something, someone beyond this island." But Callista hesitated. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind, a warning spoken long ago. Atlantis is not the world. There are places unknown, places untouched. Some welcome travelers, others do not. "We should be careful," she murmured, brushing her damp hair from her face. "There are lands beyond Atlantis, but not all are kind." Cale gave her a searching look. "You know of them." "My mother did." She turned away from the sea, forcing herself not to look back. "We need to find shelter. Then we find a way off this island." They moved inland, climbing over jagged rocks and weaving through dense foliage. The air was thick with the scent of earth and salt, and the sounds of unseen creatures rustled through the undergrowth. Callista's heart pounded with every step, her mind still reeling from all they had lost. Cale walked beside her in silence, his expression unreadable. She knew little of him, only that he was not from Atlantis, that his ship had wrecked upon their shores days before the city's fall. He had spoken of places beyond her world, of stories that warned of civilizations lost to time. Now, she could not ignore his words. "Cale," she said after a while, breaking the silence, "you spoke of cities that rose too high and fell beneath the waves. How did you know?" He exhaled sharply, glancing at her before answering. "Because Atlantis was not the first." She stopped walking, her pulse quickening. "What do you mean?" He turned to face her fully, his gaze steady. "There are stories passed down among my people, stories of civilizations that reached too far, that sought power beyond their grasp. They were punished, buried beneath the earth, swallowed by the sea. Atlantis was only one of many." Callista swallowed hard, her thoughts racing. If what he said was true, then her home's fate had been written long before she was born. "Why did no one warn us?" she whispered. Kale's expression darkened. Maybe they did. A sudden rustling in the trees made them both turn sharply. The wind carried a scent unfamiliar, yet unmistakable: fire, wood smoke, and something else. Something metallic. They were not alone. Kale motioned for her to stay behind him, his posture tense. From the shadows of the jungle, figures emerged tall, clad in dark leather and iron, their faces obscured by masks fashioned from bone. Their weapons glinted in the dappled sunlight, curved blades and spears. Unlike anything Callista had seen before, her heart pounded as one of the figures stepped forward. His mask adorned with intricate carvings. He studied them in silence before speaking in a language neither of them understood. Kale raised his hands slowly, a gesture of peace. "We mean no harm," he said carefully. The leader tilted his head, then spoke again, this time in broken but clear speech. "You are not of this land." Callista forced herself to step forward. "We are survivors," she said, her voice steady. "Our home was lost to the sea." The leader studied them for a long moment before finally nodding. "You will come with us." There was no question in his tone, only command. Callista exchanged a glance with Kale. They had no weapons, no strength left to fight. Whatever fate awaited them in the hands of these strangers, they had no choice but to face it. The warriors led them deeper into the island, where the trees parted to reveal a settlement unlike anything Callista had ever imagined. Great stone structures rose from the jungle, etched with symbols that pulsed faintly in the fading sunlight. Fires burned in metal braziers, casting shadows across walls that told stories in images, war, gods, and something more. Something ancient. They were brought before an elder, a woman with silver-threaded hair and piercing amber eyes. She studied them both with a gaze that felt like it saw beyond flesh and bone, beyond time itself. "You have come from the lost city," she said. It was not a question. Callista's breath caught. "You know of Atlantis." The elder's lips pressed into a thin line. "We know of many things." She gestured to the walls behind her, to the carvings that seemed to glow. Atlantis was not the first, and it will not be the last. Callista felt the weight of those words settle into her bones. She had thought the fall of her city was the end of everything. But now, as she stood before the people who had been waiting, watching, she realized something terrifying. This was only the beginning. Callista's breath was unsteady as she took in the elder's words. Atlantis was not the first, and it will not be the last. The firelight cast flickering shadows on the stone walls, making the ancient carvings seem alive. Scenes of towering cities swallowed by waves, lands consumed by fire, civilizations erased as if they had never existed. Her mind reeled. Could it be true that Atlantis's fate had been written long before its fall? The elder stepped forward, her amber eyes studying Callista, and Kale, with a gaze that felt like it pierced through flesh, seeing straight into their souls. "You come from the city that was swallowed by the sea," she said, her voice as steady as the earth beneath them. "You are its remnants, but you are not the first to seek answers." Callista's fingers curled into fists. "If you knew this would happen, why did no one warn us?" The elder's gaze darkened, her face etched with something between sorrow and acceptance. Would they have listened? Silence hung between them. No, Callista knew the answer before the words left the elder's lips. The Atlanteans had believed themselves untouchable. Even when the omens came, when the earth wept, and the tides fell silent, her people had refused to see. The king had ignored the signs, dismissed the warnings. And now, the greatest city the world had ever known was nothing more than legend, lost beneath the ocean. Kale spoke next, his voice quiet but firm. "Who are you? What is this place?" The elder tilted her head slightly, as if weighing how much to tell them. Finally, she gestured for them to follow. "Come," she said simply. The warriors who had led them here stepped aside, as Callista and Kale followed the elder deeper into the settlement. The stone structures loomed around them, their walls carved with symbols older than any Callista had seen in Atlantis's grand archives. They walked in silence until they reached a great open hall, its roof lost to the sky. The floor made of dark stone that shimmered faintly under the moonlight. At its center stood an obelisk, taller than any man, its surface etched with the same strange markings that adorned the walls. The elder placed a weathered hand upon the stone. The moment her fingers touched it, the carvings glowed, lines of pale blue light threading through the stone like veins. Callista stepped closer, drawn to the way the energy pulsed beneath the surface. "This is the archive," the elder said. "It remembers what the world forgets." Kale frowned. "What do you mean?" The elder turned to them, her expression grave. Atlantis was not the first civilization to rise beyond its place, and it will not be the last to fall. She traced a hand across the glowing surface of the obelisk, and suddenly the light expanded, shifting, twisting, until images appeared in the air before them. Callista gasped. There, suspended in glowing blue light, was Atlantis as it had once been. Its golden towers, its shining streets, its people moving through the city as if they still lived. But even as Callista reached toward the image, the vision shifted. The sky darkened, the ocean rose, and in a flash of violent energy, the city crumbled, swallowed whole by the waves. The image faded, replaced by another. Another city one Callista did not recognize, but just as grand, spires reaching toward the sky, streets carved from polished stone. And just as quickly, the vision turned dark. The earth cracked open beneath it, flames consuming it from below, until nothing remained but ash. Again, the image changed. A city built upon floating islands, its people clad in shimmering silver, its towers suspended in the air itself. And then lightning, an explosion of energy so bright Callista had to shield her eyes. When she looked again, the city was gone. The obelisk dimmed, and the visions faded into the dark. Callista stood frozen, her mind struggling to comprehend what she had seen. How is this possible? She whispered. The elder's face was unreadable, because history does not remember them, but the archive does. Kale exhaled sharply. So you're saying there have been others, like Atlantis, other civilizations that rose and fell. More than you could count, the elder said. Each one believed itself eternal. Each one reached beyond what was meant to be grasped. And each one was erased, as if it had never existed. A heavy silence fell over them. Callista's heart pounded in her chest. If what the elder said was true, then Atlantis had only been one chapter in a cycle that had repeated for eons. A story of greatness, of hubris, and of inevitable ruin. But why? She demanded, frustration breaking through her fear. Why does this keep happening? Why are they destroyed? The elder sighed, stepping away from the obelisk. Some say it is the will of the gods. Others say it is punishment for arrogance. But the truth is that power, once taken too far, always brings destruction. Callista swallowed hard. She thought of the heart of Atlantis, the power sealed beneath the city, the force that had pulsed like a living thing before everything collapsed. Had they brought their own doom upon themselves? Then what about us? Kale asked. We survived. Does that mean we're part of the next cycle? The elder studied them for a long moment. Then, she said, that depends on what you choose to do next. Callista's breath hitched. The elder gestured toward the carvings on the walls. The past is written, but the future is not. You have seen what becomes of those who rise too high. But you are different. You carry the knowledge of what came before. And knowledge is power greater than any weapon, greater than any empire. Callista exchanged a glance with Kale. There was something in his eyes, determination, tempered with understanding. He had spoken of these lost civilizations before, but now they had proof. We have to stop it, she murmured. This cycle, we have to find a way to break it. Kale nodded, his jaw tightening. But how? The elder placed a hand on the obelisk, her expression unreadable. The answers you seek lie beyond this island. The world is vast, and its secrets are scattered. If you wish to break the cycle, you must seek those who remember the truth. Callista felt a weight settle in her chest, but it was not fear. It was resolve. Atlantis was gone, but she and Kale were still here. They carried its memory, its warnings, and perhaps, just perhaps, they could ensure that history did not repeat itself again. She turned to Kale. Then we find them. A slow smile tugged at the corner of his lips. We find them. And with that, the journey truly began. The wind howled as Callista and Kale stood at the edge of the Elder settlement, staring at the endless sea beyond. The weight of knowledge sat heavy in Callista's chest. The fall of Atlantis had not been an isolated tragedy. It had been one of many. A cycle of rise and ruin, civilizations erased from history, their power consumed by forces beyond mortal control. And yet, they had survived. The Elder's words echoed in her mind. The answers you seek lie beyond this island. But where? The Elder had given them provisions, water, dried meats, and a cloak woven from dark fibers that resisted both wind and rain. She had also given them something far more valuable, a map, a crude, hand-carved thing etched onto a slab of smooth stone, marked with symbols Callista did not recognize. The only word she could read, carved into the uppermost corner, sent a chill through her spine. Tartessos. She traced the name with her fingertips, glancing at Kale. Have you heard of this place? He nodded, his expression grim. Only in whispers. It is said to be older than Atlantis itself, a city of merchants and scholars who once traded with the entire world. But then, one day, it vanished. Some say the gods took it. Others say it never existed at all. He exhaled sharply. But if the Elder marked it on this map, then it must mean something. Callista clenched her jaw. Then that's where we go. Kale hesitated. And if we find it, what then? She met his gaze, determination burning in her veins. Then we find out why all of this keeps happening. And we stop it. No more words were needed. The settlement's warriors led them to the shoreline, where a vessel waited, a small wooden boat, simple in design, with a triangular sail that bore the mark of the Elder's people. It was not Atlantis's grand ships, nor the war galleys Kale had once sailed upon, but it would carry them forward. They set sail at dawn. The ocean stretched before them, vast and endless, the waves lapping gently against the boat's sides. The island faded into the distance behind them, swallowed by mist. The journey was silent at first, both of them lost in their thoughts. The weight of what they had learned sat between them like an unspoken truth. Callista ran her fingers over the edge of the map, her mind racing. If Atlantis was not the first, then who had come before? How many great civilizations had risen, believing themselves eternal, only to be swallowed by time, and more importantly, who had erased them. Days passed in a haze of wind and salt. They took turns at the sail, navigating by the stars. The sky was vast, the sea endless, and yet something gnawed at the edges of Callista's mind. A feeling like being watched. One night, as she stood at the helm, Kale sleeping beside her, she saw them. Dark shapes gliding beneath the water. Her breath hitched, her fingers tightening on the boat's side. The shapes were massive, moving too fluidly to be ordinary sea creatures. She strained her eyes against the darkness, but the moment she tried to focus, they were gone. A chill ran down her spine. She did not sleep that night. By the time the 5th day dawned, land finally appeared on the horizon. At first, it was only a faint silhouette, shrouded in mist. But as they drew closer, the outline of crumbling structures became visible against the sky. Great stone columns, half buried in the sand. Towering walls, eroded by time. A city long abandoned, its bones left to decay beneath the sun. Tartessos. Callista's heart pounded as they beached the boat, dragging it onto the shore. The air was thick with silence, the kind that pressed against the ears, making everything feel heavier. "Stay close," Kale murmured, hand resting on the hilt of the dagger he had salvaged from the Elder's warriors. Callista nodded, stepping forward. The sand gave way to cracked stone as they passed beneath a massive archway, its surface carved with symbols far older than anything she had seen in Atlantis. The streets beyond were lined with ruins, the remains of structures that must have once been magnificent temples, markets, towering spires that had crumbled into little more than skeletal remains. But something was wrong. There were no signs of life. No birds, no insects. Even the wind barely stirred the dust. It was as if the city had been forgotten. "This place feels cursed," Kale muttered. Callista didn't disagree. They moved deeper into the ruins, their footsteps echoing in the unnatural silence. And then she saw it. At the heart of the city stood a single structure still intact, a massive domed building, its entrance flanked by statues of figures lost to time. At its center, embedded into the arch above the doorway, was a symbol, a spiral etched deep into the stone. Callista stopped in her tracks. "I've seen that before." Kale frowned. "Where?" She turned to him, her pulse quickening. "In Atlantis, in the catacombs where the oldest records were kept. This symbol, it marked the scrolls that were forbidden, the ones the council refused to acknowledge." Kale's expression darkened. "Then, whatever's inside, it's something they didn't want anyone to find." Callista swallowed hard, stepping toward the entrance. The doors were made of bronze, untouched by rust, as if time had not dared to touch them. She placed her hands against the cold metal and pushed. The doors groaned open. The air inside was thick with the scent of dust, and something older, something untouched for centuries. A great circular chamber stretched before them, lined with towering shelves filled with stone tablets and scrolls. At the center of the room stood a pedestal, and upon it, a single book. Callista approached cautiously, her fingers trembling as she reached for it. The cover was made of something she could not name, dark and smooth, etched with the same spiral symbol from the entrance. She hesitated, then slowly opened it. The words within were written in a language she could barely comprehend. But one passage stood out, carved in deep, precise letters. The cycle cannot be broken. The ones who watch will not allow it. A chill ran through her veins. The ones who watch, she whispered, looking up at Kale. He was staring past her, his face pale. Callista, he said slowly, his voice barely above a breath. She turned and froze. The shadows at the edge of the chamber were moving. Not the flickering of the torchlight, not the shifting of dust. Something else, something watching. Callista's blood turned to ice. The cycle could not be broken because something was ensuring it never would. Callista's breath caught in her throat as the shadows moved, not like shifting light or the flicker of fire. No, these figures watched, silent, unmoving, a presence so heavy it pressed against her chest like unseen hands. Kale's fingers tightened around the hilt of his dagger, but neither of them dared to move. The chamber, ancient and untouched for centuries, now felt suffocating, as if it had been waiting for them. Callista forced herself to turn back to the book. The words burned into her mind. The cycle cannot be broken. The ones who watch will not allow it. Her pulse pounded. Who were asterisk they? What power could erase entire civilizations? Ensure history repeated itself over and over. A whisper, not a voice, but something deeper, like a thought that was not her own, pressing into her mind. You should not have come. Callista gasped, stumbling back from the pedestal. Kale grabbed her wrist, his grip firm. Did you hear that? He nodded, his jaw clenched. We're not alone. The figures in the shadows remained still, their presence suffocating. And then movement. One of them stepped forward, emerging from the darkness. Callista's breath seized. It was humanoid in shape, but its form was asterisk, wrong asterisk. Its body seemed made of shifting black mist, a void where a person should be. No face, no eyes. And yet, she knew it was staring at her. It spoke, though its mouth did not move. The words poured into her mind like cold water spilling through cracks in stone. You are not meant to know. A wave of nausea rolled through her vision blurring. She clutched Kale's arm, steadying herself. What are you?" she managed to whisper. The entity did not answer. Instead, it raised one shadowed hand toward the pedestal, toward the book. The moment its fingers touched the cover, the ancient pages ignited. No, Callista lunged forward, but it was too late. The flames consumed the book in an instant, burning without heat, without smoke. The knowledge within erased. Rage flared in her chest. "You're the ones who do this, aren't you?" she said, her voice shaking. "You erase everything. Atlantis, Tartessos, all the others, you make sure no one remembers them." The shadow figure did not move. Kale stepped forward, his hand still gripping his dagger. "Why?" he demanded. "Why erase history? Why destroy entire civilizations?" The whisper returned, crawling into their minds like a cold wind, slipping through cracks in stone, because they reached too far, as you are reaching now. A pulse of energy rippled through the chamber. The torches lining the walls flickered violently, their flames shrinking. The air grew thick, suffocating. Callista's heart pounded. "We have to get out of here." She turned to Kale, her voice urgent. "Run." He didn't hesitate. They sprinted toward the entrance, their footsteps echoing against the ancient stone. Behind them, the shadows stirred. The figures did not follow in the way living things would. Instead, the darkness itself seemed to bend, shifting unnaturally, warping the space around them. The moment they reached the threshold, an unseen force asterisk pulled at them, like hands grasping at their very souls. Callista gasped, her legs faltering as a wave of dizziness crashed over her. You cannot escape the cycle. She clenched her teeth, forcing herself to move. Not this time. With a final, desperate push, she and Kale crossed the threshold. The instant they did, the weight vanished. The pressure disappeared, the air suddenly clear again. Callista stumbled forward, gasping for breath. Kale caught her arm, steadying her. They turned back. The entrance to the chamber was asterisk gone asterisk, where the massive bronze doors had stood moments before. There was now only solid stone, as if the building had never had an opening at all. Kale cursed under his breath. They sealed it. Callista pressed a trembling hand to the stone. Cold, unyielding. The knowledge inside was lost. She squeezed her eyes shut, fury and frustration tangling inside her chest. They had been so close. They had found the truth, only to have it ripped from them. Kale exhaled sharply. What now? She swallowed hard, forcing herself to think. The elder said the answers were scattered. That means this wasn't the only place There have to be others. Kale nodded slowly. Then we keep searching. But as they turned away from the sealed chamber, something caught Callista's eye, a single marking, etched into the stone where the door had once been. The same spiral symbol, and beneath it, carved in ancient script, 2 words, Kemvara. She frowned. What does that mean? Kale studied the inscription, his brows furrowing. I don't know, but I've heard the name before. Callista turned to him, hope flickering through the frustration. Where? He hesitated. In the far south, beyond the great deserts. It's a place spoken of in legends, a city hidden in the sands. Some say it's the oldest civilization to ever exist, but no one knows if it's real. A chill ran down Callista's spine. Another lost city. She squared her shoulders. Then that's where we go next. Kale exhaled, shaking his head in disbelief. You really won't let this go, will you? No, she said firmly. Because if we don't stop this, if we don't find out who they are and why they're doing this, then everything will happen again. The world will keep forgetting. Cities will rise and fall, and no one will remember they ever existed. She met his gaze, her voice unwavering. I won't let that happen. Kale studied her for a long moment. Then, a slow smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. Then, let's find this Kemvara. Callista nodded, determination burning in her veins. The cycle would not claim them. Not this time. They had defied the ones who watched. Now, they would find the truth. And this time, they would not let it be erased. The wind howled as Callista and Kale left the ruins of Tartessos behind, their small boat cutting through the waves. The shadows of the ones who watched still clung to her thoughts, their warning an echo in her mind. The cycle cannot be broken. The ones who watch will not allow it. She tightened her grip on the boat's edge. No, she refused to accept that. The ones who watched had taken everything, her home, her people, and now the knowledge that could have answered why. But they had made one mistake. They had let her live. Kale adjusted the sail, his expression unreadable as he navigated southward. Kemvara, he murmured. If the legends are true, it's beyond the great deserts, buried beneath the sands. Callista traced the inscription she had seen on the stone wall, committing the name to memory. You said you've heard of it before. What do the stories say? Kale exhaled. Some claim it was the first city ever built, older than Atlantis, older than Tartessos. A place of scholars and kings, untouched by time. Others say it was a prison sealed away, hidden from the world for a reason no one remembers. He glanced at her. The ones who watched didn't destroy Tartessos. They erased asterisk it. If Kemvara is still out there, maybe it survived because they couldn't erase it. A spark of hope ignited in her chest. Then we need to find it. The journey south was brutal. Days passed in an exhausting cycle of heat and wind, their food dwindling as the sea stretched endlessly around them. Then, at last, the coastline came into view, jagged cliffs giving way to rolling dunes, an expanse of golden sand stretching as far as the eye could see. The great desert. They beached the boat and stepped onto the scorching earth. Heat shimmered on the horizon, distorting the distant shapes of crumbling ruins half buried in the dunes. Kale shielded his eyes. If we're going to survive this, we need supplies. Water, food, and shelter. Callista nodded. And a way to navigate. If Kemvara is buried beneath the sands, we'll need more than just a map. They moved inland, the sand shifting beneath their feet. Hours passed, the relentless sun beating down on them. But they were not alone. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, dark figures appeared on the dunes ahead. Riders. Kale's muscles tensed. Nomads. Callista barely had time to react before the riders surrounded them. Men and women clad in flowing robes, their faces veiled against the sand. Their leader dismounted, a tall figure with piercing amber eyes. He studied them in silence before speaking in a dialect Callista didn't understand. Kale stepped forward. We are travelers seeking Kemvara. The nomad's eyes flickered with something, recognition, perhaps. Then, without a word, he gestured for them to follow. They were led through the dunes to a hidden encampment, nestled within the ruins of a forgotten outpost. A fire burned at the center, casting flickering shadows across the sand. The leader removed his veil, revealing sharp, angular features and dark hair streaked with silver. I am Raziel, he said in the common tongue. You seek Kemvara. Callista nodded. We believe it still exists. Raziel studied them carefully. Few dare to search for it. Fewer return. Kale crossed his arms. Then you know where it is. Raziel was silent for a long moment before he finally spoke. It is not a place easily found. The sands shift and the path changes, but there is a way. He gestured toward a worn leather map, unfurling it before them. Kemvara does not lie asterisk on the desert. It lies beneath asterisk it. Callista leaned closer. The map showed a series of underground passages, tunnels winding beneath the dunes like veins beneath skin. Raziel tapped a spot near the center. The entrance is here, but the way is treacherous. The desert does not welcome those who seek its secrets. His gaze darkened. And neither do asterisk they. Callista's breath caught. The ones who watch. Raziel's jaw tightened. You have seen them. Kale nodded grimly. They tried to stop us. They erased Tartessos. They burned the only record we found. Raziel exhaled, as if confirming something he had long feared. Then you understand the danger. Kemvara was hidden because it had asterisk to be. If the ones who watch knew you were coming, they will try to stop you. Callista met his gaze, her voice unwavering. Then we have to move quickly. Raziel studied her, then nodded. At dawn, we ride. That night, sleep did not come easily. Callista lay beneath the vast desert sky, stars stretching endlessly above. The weight of what they were doing pressed against her ribs. If Kemvara held the truth, it meant the ones who watched would stop at nothing to keep them from reaching it. As her thoughts drifted, a flicker of movement caught her eye. A shadow, not human. She bolted upright, her heart pounding. The desert was vast, empty. There should have been asterisk, nothing there. But as she squinted into the darkness, she saw it. A figure just beyond the dunes, watching. A whisper drifted on the wind, curling through her thoughts like smoke. Turn back. She grabbed Kale's arm, shaking him awake. He sat up instantly, his hand flying to his dagger. What is it? Callista pointed toward the dunes, but the figure was gone. The desert was empty once more. Kale's eyes darkened. They know we're here. Callista clenched her fists. Then we can't waste any more time. At dawn, they rode. The desert stretched endlessly before them as they followed Raziel's lead, the horses moving swiftly over the dunes. Hours passed, the heat relentless, but finally they reached their destination. A great stone slab jutted from the sand, half buried, its surface etched with symbols older than any Callista had seen. The entrance to Kemvara. Raziel dismounted, brushing the sand from the stone. "This is it," he murmured. "The path downward begins here." Callista stepped forward, placing a hand against the stone. A strange sensation pulsed beneath her fingertips, as if something ancient stirred beneath the surface. Kale exhaled, no turning back now. With a deep breath, Callista pushed against the slab. The ground rumbled. Sand poured into the cracks as the stone groaned, shifting aside to reveal a dark passage descending into the earth. A rush of cold air swept past them, and from deep below, so deep it was barely audible, came a whisper. "You should not have come." Callista met Kale's gaze. Then, without hesitation, they stepped into the darkness. The air inside the passage was thick with dust, ancient and undisturbed for centuries. The stone walls, carved with symbols older than any language Callista recognized, seemed to press in on them as they descended. The flickering torchlight cast strange shadows across the worn steps, the silence deeper than anything she had ever known. Behind them, Raziel and his warriors followed closely, their movements careful, measured. Even the most hardened among them carried tension in their shoulders. None of them spoke. Callista's heart pounded. They had finally reached Kemvara. But something was wrong. The darkness ahead was asterisk too still. The air asterisk too asterisk cold. As if something was waiting. Kale walked beside her, his dagger drawn. Whatever we find down here, we face it together. She nodded, gripping the edge of her cloak as they continued downward. The stairway spiraled deep beneath the sands, the weight of the desert pressing above them. And then, at last, the passage opened into a vast chamber. Callista's breath caught in her throat. The ruins of Kemvara stretched before them. An underground city lost to time. Towering pillars lined the cavernous space, their surfaces etched with glowing blue veins that pulsed faintly, illuminating the structures in an eerie light. Streets paved with obsidian stretched into the distance, lined with buildings half collapsed, but still standing. Their intricate carvings whispering of a civilization that had once thrived. And yet there were no bodies, no bones, nothing to show that people had ever lived here at all. Kale exhaled sharply. It's still intact. Raziel stepped forward, his amber eyes scanning the city. The sands buried it, he murmured. But something else erased its people. Callista shivered. She already knew what. The ones who watch. Her gaze landed on the largest structure at the center of the city, a grand temple. Its spires still intact despite centuries underground. Something inside pulled at her, a weight pressing against her chest. The answers are in there, she whispered. Kale nodded. Then let's move. They crossed the ruined streets, their footsteps echoing in the eerie silence. The deeper they moved into the city, the heavier the air became, thick with an unseen force that sent chills down Callista's spine. It felt asterisk, wrong asterisk, as if something was asterisk aware of their presence. As they neared the temple, Raziel stopped suddenly, his hand shooting out to halt Callista. Look, he whispered. She followed his gaze, and her blood ran cold. The ground before them was lined with dark shapes. Not rubble, not stone. Figures, tall, humanoid figures, made of the same shifting darkness that had haunted her since Tartessos. The ones who watched, they stood motionless, their faceless voids turned toward the temple's entrance. But they did not move. Kale's grip on his dagger tightened. They're waiting. Callista swallowed hard. Then we go through them. Before anyone could stop her, she stepped forward. The figures did not react. Step by step, she moved between them, her breath shallow, waiting for them to attack. But they remained still, their presence suffocating but unmoving. The others followed, each step careful, deliberate. The moment they passed the last figure, Callista exhaled sharply, forcing herself to keep moving. The temple doors loomed before them. Unlike the ruins outside, they were pristine, massive slabs of smooth black stone, untouched by time. The spiral symbol was carved deep into the center. Kale glanced at her. "Are you ready for this?" Callista pressed her palm against the symbol. "I have to be." The stone trembled beneath her touch. With a deep, rumbling groan, the doors opened. Inside, the temple stretched impossibly high, its walls lined with massive stone tablets covered in the same glowing script as the city outside. At the center of the chamber stood a raised platform, and upon it, a pedestal, and resting atop it, a single ancient book. Callista's pulse quickened. She stepped forward, reaching for it. "You should not have come." The whisper echoed through the chamber. The air grew thick, suffocating, as the shadows at the temple's edges moved. A deep, unnatural asterisk pull gripped Callista's chest, forcing her to her knees. The weight of something unseen crushed against her ribs, as if the very air was asterisk pushing her out. The ones who watched were here. A figure emerged from the darkness, larger than the others, its form shifting like smoke, its faceless void gazing down at her. Unlike the silent figures outside, this one radiated something deeper, something ancient, a force beyond mortal comprehension. You cannot break the cycle. Callista forced herself to her feet, her body trembling. "Why?" she demanded. "Why do you do this? Why erase everything?" The presence did not move. "Because it is necessary." Kale pulled her back as Raziel and the others drew their weapons. But Callista didn't move. "Necessary," she repeated, her voice sharp. "You destroy civilizations. You make the world forget." "Why?" The entity remained silent for a moment. Then the whisper returned, curling through her thoughts like ice. "Because knowledge is power, and power unchecked destroys all." Callista's breath hitched. The vision from Tartessos flashed in her mind, cities rising, only to fall. Atlantis's great power vanishing beneath the sea. The warning left behind in the ruins. The cycle cannot be broken. "That's a lie," she spat. "You don't stop destruction. You cause asterisk it." The presence loomed closer, its weight pressing against her very soul. And if we did not, images flooded her mind, cities stretching beyond the heavens, powers unlocked that defied the gods, and then destruction, not just of civilizations, of the asterisk world itself. A shudder ran through her. The ones who watched were not simply erasing history. They were asterisk, preventing something. Callista's mind reeled. If the cycle was not broken, the world would continue as it always had. Rise, fall, forget. Again and again. But if the cycle asterisk was asterisk broken, what then? Kale grabbed her arm. Callista, we have to go. The presence pushed. The temple trembled. The very air around them threatened to crush them. Callista reached for the book. The entity moved. Darkness erupted around them, swallowing the chamber. The last thing Callista saw was Kale's hand reaching for hers. Then everything vanished. The ruins, the temple, the ones who watched. And when she opened her eyes, they were no longer in Kemvara. They were asterisk somewhere else. Somewhere they were asterisk, never meant to be. Callista's breath caught in her throat as the darkness peeled away. One moment, she had been reaching for the book in Kemvara. The weight of the ones who watched crushing down upon her then. In an instant, everything had changed. She stumbled forward, sand shifting beneath her feet. But it wasn't the sand of the great desert. The air was different, cool, thick with moisture. The sky above was not a vast stretch of golden heat, but a ceiling of swirling, endless asterisk black. A cavern, a place that should not exist. Kale groaned beside her, pushing himself up, his eyes wide as he took in their surroundings. Raziel and his warriors were nowhere to be seen. They were alone. Where are we? Kale's voice was hoarse, laced with confusion. Callista turned in a slow circle, her heart pounding. The cavern stretched endlessly, the walls carved with symbols that pulsed with a dim, rhythmic glow. The air was asterisk alive, with an unnatural hum, a sound that crawled beneath her skin. At the center of the vast chamber stood something impossible, a monolith. It was unlike anything she had ever seen. Black stone so dark it seemed to devour the light, stretching high into the cavern's ceiling. Its surface was smooth, untouched by time, yet it radiated an overwhelming sense of asterisk age. And there, etched into its surface, the spiral symbol. Callista's blood ran cold. "This isn't Kemvara," she whispered. "This is something asterisk older." Kale approached cautiously, his hand resting on the hilt of his dagger. "Do you feel that?" he murmured. She nodded. The monolith pulsed not with light, but with something else. A presence, a consciousness. A whisper slid through her mind. "You have come too far," she gasped, stumbling back. The voice was deeper than before, layered with something ancient and inhuman. Kale swore under his breath, drawing his dagger. "They brought us here." Callista's heart pounded. "Why? What is this place?" A silence stretched through the cavern. Then the whisper returned. "This is the first city." Her breath caught. She had searched for answers in Atlantis, in Tartessos, in Kemvara. But all along, the truth had been hidden asterisk beneath even those ruins. This place, this monolith, was the origin. Callista swallowed hard. What happened here? The air shifted, and then images poured into her mind. A civilization unlike any she had ever imagined. Towers of crystal and stone, rising into a sky filled with stars brighter than she had ever seen. Beings taller than humans, their eyes glowing with knowledge, their hands crafting wonders beyond comprehension. They had not merely built cities. They had shaped asterisk reality itself. And then, the hunger, the endless thirst for power. She saw them reach beyond their limits, twisting the fabric of the world itself, unraveling the threads of existence. Their knowledge became their undoing. The forces they sought to control turned against them. The first city collapsed, not in fire, not in war, but in something far worse. Unmaking. Reality itself folded, consuming them, wiping them from history. And in their place, the ones who watched, they were not gods, not guardians. They were the remnants, the last fragments of a civilization that had gone too far, now bound to erase any who followed the same path. Callista staggered back, gasping. The images faded, but the truth remained. Kale caught her before she fell. Callista. She shook her head, her pulse roaring in her ears. "They're not protecting us," she whispered. "They're asterisk preventing us from making the same mistake. Because they were us." Kale's expression hardened. "And they think they have the right to decide who survives." The whisper returned, colder now. "If we did not, the world would cease to exist." Callista's hands curled into fists. "That's not true. You erase civilizations before they even asterisk have the chance to make that mistake. You do asterisk know what they could have become." A silence stretched through the cavern. "Then, would you risk the world to find out?" The weight of the question pressed against her ribs. The cycle existed because of this truth. Atlantis had reached too far. Tartessos, Kemvara, all the lost civilizations, each had drawn too close to something they were never meant to grasp. If the ones who watched did not erase them, would the world even still exist? Her mind reeled. If she continued this search, if she truly tried to break the cycle, what if they were right? Kale stepped forward, his voice steady. "No one should have this much power. Not you, not us. The world deserves to make its own choices." Callista took a shaky breath. "Let asterisk us decide our fate." The cavern trembled. The monolith pulsed. The whisper, for the first time, hesitated. Then take it." The monolith asterisk split. A crack formed down its center, and from within, something asterisk glowed. a single fragment of knowledge. A choice. Kale grabbed her arm. Callista, don't. She hesitated, her fingers hovering over the fragment. If she took it, the truth would be known. The cycle would be broken, or the world would fall, as the first city had. Her heart pounded. She had spent so long searching for answers. But now, standing at the edge of the unknown, she realized the truth wasn't what she had expected. Some knowledge was not meant to be held. She pulled her hand away. "No," she said softly. "The world will rise and fall, but it should do so on its own." The cavern stilled, the monolith sealed, and in an instant, they were outside. Callista gasped, the desert sun blinding as she collapsed onto the sand. The ruins of Kemvara stood behind them, untouched, undisturbed. Kale knelt beside her, his expression unreadable. Raziel and his warriors rushed toward them. What happened? Callista exhaled, the weight in her chest finally easing. "We saw the first city." She looked at Kale, a quiet understanding passing between them. Raziel frowned. "And did you find the answers you sought?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "No," she lied. "It was gone, nothing left." Kale nodded slowly. She had made her choice. The cycle would continue, but this time, not by force. This time, the world would shape itself. And maybe, just maybe, it would prove the ones who watched wrong. She turned to Kale, a slow smile tugging at her lips. "Come on," she said. "We have our own story to write." As the sun rose over the dunes, they walked away, leaving the past behind, and stepping into a future that was truly unknown. The cycle had not been broken, but it had finally changed.